Hello again everyone, it is myself, Jonathan, also known as the PC Genie. Today we'll be looking at whether clothing can make good armour. Now I know it might sound a bit ridiculous. It's clothing, it's not proper armour. Surely you're going to just get hacked into by a sword or something. But there are historical accounts where, in particular instances, people were protected and had their lives saved, not by dedicated armour, but by certain types of clothing. So it certainly is plausible as a type of idea. Now, when we're looking at what makes good armour, whether it's dedicated armour or something more improvised, there are two main things we tend to look at as good properties of them. Firstly, there is absorption. So if something pads you out, it's that sort of thing where if something hits you, a bit like when people have got boxing gloves, although that's the reverse, or things like airbags in cars. It's that idea of absorption where the effect of an impact is cushioned and that the armour or piece of clothing or whatever takes the impact, and even to a degree some of the force that would help to do things like slicing and chopping or even puncturing, it by absorbing it and gradually slowing down something like a projectile or an incoming close combat weapon, that lessens the effect enough to either reduce the amount of injury or completely get rid of it. The other effect is deflection, and that's quite simply the idea that rather than taking the force and slowing it down and absorbing it, it just simply redirects the force elsewhere. And it's even something that's encouraged with different people in close combat, that sometimes a good idea is not to try and stop a weapon, but just to simply turn it aside. Because as they say, a miss is as good as a mile, and an armour can help it miss it without you doing anything. So, in terms of the sorts of clothing I think would work, firstly, even things like this that I'm wearing now, this is just a simple sort of acrylic jumper, sort of military style, but it wouldn't make great armour. It certainly isn't that resistant to cutting, but it does have a degree of absorption. It does add a degree of padding, and that can help, especially against blunt instruments, but can also help a bit against sharp instruments. But again, it wouldn't be a very strong force. Now of course under this I'm wearing a typical t-shirt, the I'm Not Weird, I'm Limited Edition shirt. Now I'm going to say right off the bat, unless you've got one of those special types of shirts designed with Kevlar and other materials to stop against things like cutting and piercing, things like simple shirts, they're pretty much useless on their own. Like I say, you need something thicker like a jumper on top to have any effect at all. Now beyond that, another thing that's worth considering is that sometimes you get clothing that actually is, to a degree, designed to actually help resist against abrasions and cutting and things like that. So of course I'll go with here, the simple leather jacket. The reason why it is, as many of you will know, the reason it is so popular with people like bikers and those sorts of people is if you were on your motorcycle and you should crash and fly off, that skidding along the ground, that scratching and the abrasions don't cut the jacket open and therefore don't carve up the person's skin underneath it. But the same effect can also apply against weapons. Now granted, this jacket isn't so great as something like this jumper I've got underneath at the absorption factor, in terms of it doesn't pad and cushion as much, but it is an interesting resilient material that doesn't tear as easily, like I said, so it actually is better against sharp force trauma. So there's another thing that you can consider when you're looking at things like armours and of course clothing, the combination. So like in this particular instance, this jacket is helping against things like perhaps sharp instruments such as blades and things like that, but also the jumper underneath that's more padded and cushioned can help underneath to add as a sort of, well, almost like a sort of pillow against various things that are going to strike me, even if they are sharp, to stop that force behind it from breaking my bones, basically. So there are those as well. Like I say, there are types of clothing designed to actually help against things like ripping. And I think I heard somewhere that even things like jeans were originally designed to actually help against abrasion and to have trousers and things for people like miners and other such people in jobs to stop it from ripping. And again, things like hiking clothing can do the same as well. So when you look at those angles, rather than just common fashionable clothing, you actually see clothing that even more so could, in a pinch, act as some sort of improvised armour. Now the last thing I'll mention on my list, to make sure this video isn't too long, is of course one very obvious, well to me, version you see from the medieval period. And these are called sort of gambesons, arming jackets, quilted jacks, whatever you want to call them. They are quite simple. These are the sorts of items of clothing that you would wear underneath dedicated armour. However, even if you are too poor to afford proper armour like, you know, plate, burgundy, mail armour, all those types of things, even these arming garments can in themselves act as a form of armour. Now in this particular case, this is a sort of a canvas type thing. Basically you'd normally have seen them made of things like linen and the rest. And it's quite simple really. You've got a sort of resilient, toughened, you know, more coarse material on the outside, which helps against things like cuts, abrasions, punctures, those sorts of things. And in the quilting, you've also got, well, simple padding that stops against the impacts of the trauma. Now again, this is of course, this is closer to being a dedicated armour, and it is surprisingly effective actually against things like swords and spears and the rest. But I mean, this same concept can apply to clothing as well, as in more modern clothing, because you do see designs even these days copying the same type of effect, even if not to as great a degree. So you could have things like something that's got some sort of material on the outside, even if it is just something more fragile like nylon, but on the inside it's got the same type of quilting exactly like this, and it's got that padding. Of course in that instance it's designed against the cold, but the same type of design basically functions similarly to this sort of padded jacket. So again, those types of coats and other sorts of items that have quilting and padding in them can help against impacts, and to a lesser degree against sharp items. So again, as it's shown in historical context, there have been instances of clothing acting as armour, and with redesigning, even clothing, you know, just really basic modern clothing can act as armour. And just as a final note I'll leave you on, another thing that can always be done if you felt like it, like I've done myself to help with historical European martial arts, is just simply modifying clothing. I can't find it at the moment, but I had these trousers and I got these bits of carpeting. You can use things like sometimes duct tape, scraps from old clothing to thicken and pad and do things like that. Or again, do the same thing as with this, start quilting to have thick sort of stuffing on the inside and sew them all together to keep it all in one place. That kind of thing can be done to your standard clothing to turn it into some form of improvised armour. Now granted, I don't imagine that many people who do it, but it's worth looking into. So yeah, tell me what you think, and see you in the next video. Cheers!